Well, good morning, church. In Mark chapter 11, we read these words. Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple. Now listen to these next words. It's a New American Standard. And after looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12 since he was already late. We're going to study this passage a little bit on and off through this week, and because Jesus is coming back to this same temple to cleanse the temple, and I'll give you some thoughts, and at least in my mind, as to what some of the challenges were there that Jesus found and how they affected really what Jesus was trying to get everybody to understand. But the word that's used here, it's just one word. In our translation, it says, after looking around at everything. It's literally one Greek word. It's a compound word. The RSV, I think, uses this round about upon all things. He looked round about upon all things. And there's lots of different Greek words for looking at things, examining things. You might think, for example, he was going to scrutinize it, that he was looking at it to inspect it. That was kind of my thought when I looked this up, because I was fascinated by this concept of him just looking around at everything, kind of like a food inspector would come in and look at everything in detail to inspect it. But that's not the word that's used here, nor is it this word. There's a word in the Greek that's used for to look at something and kind of gaze upon it with wonder, kind of like a child seeing something for the first time. G. Campbell Morgan says Jesus didn't look at it that way. He actually says the word means to look thoroughly at the whole of what he sees and contemplate it with great thoughtfulness. In other words, kind of like Mary when she pondered these things in her heart. Jesus has taken all of the activities of the temple in the outer court of the temple where he stood. He's taken it all into his mind and pondering it with thoughtfulness. And I'll share with you some of the things coming up in the next couple of devotions about kind of what's going on here in my thoughts. But today I just want you to know that he's contemplatively watching over people in the household of God. There's a setting that he walks into that should be a place of worship, a place of prayer. It's the household of God. Paul calls it the household of God. And Jesus should see some evidence of worship there, but instead he's contemplating what he sees, and obviously it's not good. In Revelation chapter 3, you have this list of churches, and let me just catch a couple of them with you. It says, Revelation 3, to the angel of the church, Revelation 2, to the angel of the church of Thyatira, I know your deeds. It literally means I've seen them, I've watched them. To the church at Sardis, he writes, I know your deeds. The angel to the church at Philadelphia writes, I know your deeds. To the church at Laodicea, he writes, I know your deeds. So I really want to just have you contemplate with me today. While we were worshiping at church yesterday, while we were interacting in our house of worship, Paul calls it the household of God, Jesus was watching us. He knows us. Let that sink in and let it motivate you to honor the one who died for your freedom. Jesus is paying attention to us when we worship, and he wants to see true worship, us worshiping in spirit and truth. He wants to see our hearts softened and surrendered and all those things. But I'm just fascinated by this passage, Mark chapter 11. He came in and looked all around at everything very closely, contemplating it. And then you look at these churches, he's observing us. He knows what we're going through. He knows what we're doing. He knows our activities. He knows our hearts. So while you're worshiping, know that he's paying attention to you. And there's great comfort in that, but there's also a challenge to serve him and love him well. Be blessed. We'll see you back tomorrow.